let's dive into and this is going to be another one that I'm sure I'm going to be
This
very
is the fun one.
very well educated on. You're getting to know you topic, kung fu movies.
Yes,
Hit me.
I'm a big kung fu movie buff, especially classic kung fu movies. Now, when somebody says kung fu movies or action movies and stuff, they're usually talking about something modern, or they're talking about Bruce Lee, which is the more mainstream answer to a lot of stuff.
I think of like Three Ninjas.
That's
that
not
was-
no. That's a bootleg. That's a bootleg wannabe kung fu movie. Okay,
Surf
it's
Ninjas?
classic.
How about Surf Ninjas?
Same thing. Come on,
Beverly
son.
Hills Ninja.
It's fun. Those are fun movies. I'll give you that. Those are fun comedy / action movies. Those are cool, but those aren't like kung fu movies like 1960s / 1970s movies. That was the golden era for a lot of kung fu classics that were like cheesy and stuff.
All right, so hit me with some. What about kung fu movies resonates with you? What like where did this start? Where like did you get into it at a young age? Was it like something that like somebody introduced to you and you were like this is for me?
For me, I wasn't into it in a young age. I almost thought it was non-existent. Besides Bruce Lee, later on in life, like towards my middle and high school years, kung fu movies, like real kung fu movies, weren't really like a thing for me. I just not something I ever explored. It wasn't until I got later into adulthood, like maybe like more than a couple years ago, where I really started to explore it and really kind of like dive deep into it, that I really started to appreciate them and just have fun with them. Because kung fu movies, by cinema standards, they're not the best movies out there. They're kind of bad to some extent. And the reason being is because they're very simple in nature, especially they were a product of the time, especially in the 1970s, where that was a fad amongst a lot of people. Like the late 60s to like mid 70s into the late 70s, right before when the 80s started to kick off, was when, you know, people were really into kung fu movies and they were proud and they were expressive about it and such. Then you started getting to action movies in the 80s, which is where you started to get Arnold, when you started to get Predator, you started to get, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Chuck Norris, you know, and a variety of other different, you know, crazy action movie actors, Sylvester Stallone and stuff. But really, before all that stuff, there was a lot of the Hong Kong movie flicks that you would see at the cinema, the drive-through cinema, that people would get into and stuff. So that's where I really kind of deep dived into it and really got a kick out of enjoying them.
So what was it that drew you to it? What was the spark?
It was curiosity, because obviously there was a point in my life where I wanted to go back and watch all the Bruce Lee movies. And I'm not talking about just Enter the Dragon. I'm not talking about just the Green Hornet. I'm not even talking about Matlock or anything like that stuff that he did back in the day. I'm talking about going back to like the Big Boss, Fist of Fury, you know, and I'll tell everybody the other names and stuff because the naming conventions for kung fu movies is ridiculous. Also, Way of the Dragon, like some of his earlier films before he came and did his last movie, which was Enter the Dragon, before he died and stuff. Once I watched those movies, and I watched documentaries about Bruce Lee, like, you know, how Bruce Lee changed the world, which was like a big History Channel documentary, which is awesome. Everybody should watch that at some point. But they talk about why Bruce Lee was significant, because before him, or before when he really started to gain traction and stuff, Hong Kong movies or kung fu movies that were coming here out west were really doing a lot of hokey stuff. They were very fantastical. They weren't based on realism. Bruce Lee was always about realism and stuff. And that was where there was a big changing point in the action movie genre, especially coming here from China or Hong Kong over here to the United States.
Excellent. So outside of so you kind of go through the Bruce Lee filmography. Where does that lead you from there? Where do you find other stuff from that era? Do you find contemporary kung fu that kind of lives on in that spirit?
I go through multiple spots basically, like in that regard. Like the first thing I would say that it really led me to, especially because of the people that were involved in like some of his other movies and stuff, is the Shaw Brothers. The Shaw Brothers films. Shaw Brothers films are like a collection of different kung fu movies that were of like the 1970s, like early 1970s, or again, depending on which one you're talking about, mid to late, where they're very cheesy. They're almost Hong Kong Fooey-esque, and that's a very like bad thing to say, you know, about like the action movie genre, especially martial arts movie genre and stuff. Compared to what we got now. Like what we got now is handled with a lot more seriousness, very heavily influenced by Bruce Lee, heavily influenced also by movies like The Matrix, you know, and different stuff like that. But back then, it was a lot more play. It was a gimmick. It was a little bit more of a fad. It was like they talk, when you watch a movie and you talk to somebody from that era, it's like all about the style. The Wu-Tang Clan is a perfect example. The Wu-Tang Clan actually sampled a lot of classic kung fu movies for some of their tracks. This is where they get the Wu-Tang name from. It's from some of those movies, the Wu-Tang style and whatnot. It's very cheesy movies that just like the plot and the narrative and the continuity is like all over the place. They're almost garbage by that extent, but it wasn't even about that. It was about like the crazy personality, the fighting, the cheesy fighting, where it's like it just looked cool for the first time that you saw it, even though it was nowhere near realistic. It was completely fantastical. It was completely off the wall, unrealistic.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. I feel like I've seen video of his name's escaping me. The guy, the blind non-Jedi guy from
Zatoichi.
Yeah. I've seen like video of his stuff. Right? Would that be some like that? That seems to be kind of a modern what I would have in my mind as modern kung fu, where it's there is kind of an over-the-top quality of him like taking on a room of 100 people coming at him or something like that, and doing it very effortlessly and just kind of like swatting them away, or like playing with them almost in moments in those fights. Is that kung fu, or is that some offshoot? Is that something else?
That's kind of something else, because you're referring to Shinra Inouye from like Rogue One, okay, which is like the blind like force user guy, but that's inspired by Zatoichi, Zatoichi is the blind swordsman, and that's more Japanese stuff that gets into samurai movies, where you start talking about Seven Samurai or any of the other the Hidden Fortress type of stuff, which is also heavily inspired Star Wars, but like more the kung fu movie stuff is different.
Yeah, and I'm in particular like I've got a visual in my head of just that actor doing a big grandiose fight scene, and I just don't know, like I didn't remember his name, and I don't have any context for it's probably just something I've seen like in a Twitter video or something like that of like a 2-minute sequence that like when I think and like I'm sure a lot of it comes from that I don't have a concrete idea of what kung fu is. Like I can identify Bruce Lee, but outside of that, like kung fu versus martial arts versus I mean even the combat of something like The Matrix, I don't know what distinguishes kung fu from other stuff. So can you help me with that? What like help me kind of define kung fu and its form.
Well, that's the thing. Like sometimes it's a little bit hard because some movies blend into multiple avenues. Like for a perfect example, The Raid, okay, which is a big modern day, I guess you could call it a kung fu action flick, okay, because it's got elements of like crazy martial arts that's in it, as well as also like gun plays, knife play, sword play, and all these different things. A lot of people get caught up on like what are the type of things that people are doing physically that and the fighting and stuff. But also you have to think about the narrative stuff. You also have to think about the philosophical stuff, the type of topics that they touch on here and there. Perfect example that I would say is like a true kung fu flick from back in the day, from like the 1970s, is the Five Deadly Venoms, which is a Shaw Brothers movie. Five Deadly Venoms is really about a guy that is tasked by his master to go check up on his 5 pupils and kill any of the ones that have used his teachings for bad. For like to harm people and stuff. That's really what that whole movie's about. And now, again, it gets all over the place, and there's other things that go along with it. But that's what it is essentially at heart. It's about a pupil filling out the last wishes of his dying master, like that. And as compared to like more modern day movies, they'll get caught up on other things, like doing the raid, doing a particular type of raid on different stuff, or something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is one of those more fantastical ones. It was one of the more modern day kung fu movies, which is more fantastical and stuff, because there's a lot of wire work in that, and that's what really heavily inspired the wire work that like what you see in like stuff like The Matrix and like more movies that came afterwards and stuff. So it's very hard depending on which movie you're looking at, to define it as one particular type of like, action movie, which is really martial arts and kung fu movies. They're all under the same umbrella as action, which you could put under the same umbrella as like, 80s action movies, like American action movies, or anything of the sort, like the Fast and the Furious, another action movie. You could put all those under the same umbrella. But with kung fu movies, I feel like for me, what makes them stand out is besides like the different type of combat, the melee combat and everything else, it's usually with stuff that not involving guns. And the reason why I say it is because that's a very Bruce Lee thing where he makes it a point like there's no guns in his movies, because if there was a gun involved, the conflict would be over in like 2 seconds. It'd be a wrap.
Yeah.
Like
it's,
that. He makes
that moment from Raiders of the Lost Ark. The guy's doing the sword fighting, and he just shoots him.
Exactly. That's a thing. But even in Bruce Lee's movies, like he makes it a point. It's like immediately when the guy's trying to pull out a gun, his boss is like, "Here, no guns," because he's going to attract attention. And obviously, the conflict would be over. There'd be cops all over the place, and other things too. Is like as you shoot somebody, it's over. At the end of Fist of Fury, Bruce Lee's character dies because he dies by a firing squad. But he accepts it, and there's like a whole other philosophical thing behind it. But really, a lot of the kung fu movies I gravitate towards, which I consider kung fu in my eyes, or like martial arts movies in my eyes, are the ones that are like before all that, which take place in like the feudal times, or like the ancient times of like China / Hong Kong, and like that environment and such. Five Deadly Venoms is like that. Five Elemental Ninjas is like that. 36 Chambers of Shaolin, which are, again, all these movies are under that same Shaw Brothers umbrella here and there, that follow similar themes or follow similar approaches in what the type of story that they tell.
Okay, because like as we're talking, I'm going back and thinking like, I watched like a lot of Jackie Chan stuff. I would never say like Jackie Chan is, or I wouldn't think of Jackie Chan as like kung fu, but I do like I certainly, obviously he's like a martial artist all-star kind of, and he did a good job of kind of broadening it to the American audience through comedy and through I think his own physicality, in like that it was like always him doing it, and he was breaking himself, and like those stories kind of helped fuel the movies. But would those be kind of in the kung fu spirit?
Yeah, here's the thing, and it's funny that you mentioned Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan even himself considers a lot of his movies kung fu comedies. Like there were in the documentary that I mentioned, how Bruce Lee changed the world. They actually talked to him and they asked him about Bruce Lee and stuff, and how he compared if a lot of people in the industry wanted him to be the next Bruce Lee and stuff. He's like, listen, the way that I compare myself between me and him was that he's like Bruce Lee, he's the best, he's the man. Like, he's that dude that you want to be and stuff. Me, I'm the underdog. I want to be the person that, like, when I throw a punch, I hurt my hand. And it's funny. Even though I'm doing something that's like, traditional, like, kung fu movies here and there. This is what really opened up the whole Bruce-ploitation movement that was part of the kung fu movie scene. Again, it gets very complicated, so I'll try to paraphrase it and streamline it as much as best I can. With Jackie Chan, all of his movies are kung fu comedy films, or at least most of them are, because he's still doing kung fu. He's still doing all the stuff that was good at the time, but he makes it funny. That's what makes his movies so much fun to watch, because it's not just the typical stuff that you saw with a lot of other people like Chow Yun-fat, like Sammo Hung, and all these other actors that are trying to emulate the spirit and the same nature that they saw in Bruce Lee films, like that were here and there, because that was popular at the time. You gotta understand, when Bruce Lee died, it was such a shock to the genre that everybody was trying to find and scramble to find the next star and stuff. So they were trying to emulate him so bad, and they were even calling actors Bruce when they weren't even called Bruce, or calling them Bruce Lee to fool people into thinking it's actually Bruce Lee when it's not. That's when the whole Bruceploitation movement came in. But with Jackie Chan, he stood out from the crowd from being completely different, from being the complete opposite of Bruce Lee. So that's why they're called kung fu comedies.
Okay. That's cool. In terms of modern day, is there a modern day movement for trying to capture that magic of the 70s, that you're 60s and 70s? Now that we like, I think in terms of like theater movements and stuff, where it's like everything is postmodern now, where it's like everything is willing to, like, it's commenting on what came before it. Is there kind of a postmodern kung fu where it's seeing what kung fu was and saying, okay, well, here's the new take on it? Is that what we see in stuff like The Raid, or is there something that tries to be more hold more what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like give more honor to kind of what came before. Try
No.
and live on in that spirit.
No, and the reason why is because I feel like there's been a lot more of a bleeding effect between what people would consider traditional action movies or like Americanized action movies, along with whatever the action movies were back in the Hong Kong cinema, back in China and stuff. And the reason being is because everybody's trying to one up everybody with how crazy you could do different things. Like, even though they're great movies, you know, let's be real. The Raid and the Raid 2 are pretty awesome movies and they're fun. I think the Raid 1 is a little bit better, but like you got movies like that. You got movies like The Protector. You got Ong Bak, the first Ong Bak movie, and then you got Ong Bak 2 and 3, which were trash. And then you got all these other movies here and there, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or even the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon Netflix original and such. What these movies all have in common, being part of this more like modern era of cinema, is that they're trying to see how much more crazy can you go with the action and still be believable. Because in a world that's post Bruce Lee, everybody at that point in time was trying to be realistic. That's what they were trying to be at some point. There was a small era in time after Bruce Lee's death where everything reverted back to that fantastical, you know, type of like element to the fighting and to the action and the storytelling and stuff. But they also tried and failed miserably many times over to recapture that element of realism that Bruce Lee was trying to push so much. He was ahead of his time, really, compared to it. And people didn't really catch on to it until much later on. With people now, or certain actors now, you got these days, you got guys like Donnie Yen, who I think are phenomenal. Tony Jaa, again, from the Ong Bak series and the Protector and stuff. And they've done movies together here and there, and you could see this clearly as day. It's like they're really kind of like coming into their own, like being part of like these different types of movies that are action movies, still of their day, that are much more modern action movies, but are still kind of like, you know, trying to be somewhat realistic, trying to be authentic is really what I feel like what everybody's been trying to strive for a long time. They're not really trying to pay homage to what came before. I think the only real homage that anybody pays homage to is really to Bruce Lee. And there's like, whether it's a reference, whether it's a nod, whether it's like emulating him, trying to be like him. Donnie Yen did a whole movie called The Return of Chen Zhen. It's called, I think it was called not Black Mask. Oh, damn, I can't remember. But the subtitle of it is called The Return of Chen Zhen, which is literally a continuation of one of Bruce Lee's movies. And he's playing the exact same character, and he emulates an exact same fight that he had in Fist of Fury, almost to like a T. Which is funny. That's like a huge homage to him, and it's just like he's trying to be Bruce Lee in that movie, basically. So you find stuff like that, but when it comes to like some of the older classic stuff, like the Shaw Brothers stuff, or any of the other like, you know, more obscure kung fu movies, like Wing Chun. There's a movie called Wing Chun, which stars a female. I forgot the actress's name at the time, but again, you're not seeing a lot of female like action movie actresses trying to emulate what she was doing and stuff. They're trying to be like not Wendy Wu. Damn, I'm trying to remember this girl's name. She was in Crouch Tiger, Hidden Dragon. She was one of the younger fighters and stuff.
Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle, I think it's her,
Yep.
where she stole the sword and stuff. I can't
If
that's
right, that I pulled that name out of just
I don't
knowing
really
movie
have no
names
idea.
apparently.
A lot of these names either I can't pronounce or I can't remember because they're all over the place. But I could recognize them by face, or even look at the actress from Pacific Rim, who the Asian actress there that played the girl down there. She's not trying to emulate some of those other actresses what they did back in the day and whatnot, because there's a whole new movement, a whole new approach to female characters being on film and stuff towards action movies. There's a whole different nuance to it for this audience and for this day and age.
Mm-hmm. So is there a reason you think that nobody's been able to recapture that realism from Bruce Lee's era, even if it's not like it's never going to make it mainstream, but people like, it seems like in this day and age where you can get anybody doing kind of anything, it seems like we would have like YouTube series or somebody that would have found a way to kind of crack that nut and say, I'm going to do this. It's not going to make money. It's not going to make me bank, but I'm going to create this thing in the spirit of those Bruce Lee kung fu movies or the Shaw Brothers kung fu movies, and make it happen for a modern day. Take the essence of it and bring it to the 21st century. Is there a reason you think we haven't seen something like that?
Because I don't think anybody really wants to. And here's the funny thing. When you're talking about emulating the realism, what made Bruce Lee so special in his movies is that you could see the action. He was actually doing the stuff, and you could see it in real time. And like one of the biggest problems with a lot of movies, especially action movies now this day and age, and if you want a perfect example, go look at the new Resident Evil movie that suffers from this greatly. There's so many cuts.
I mean, I will not, but
yeah, don't go watch it.
No,
like,
I knew exactly where you're going with like everything gets cut and edited to
exactly.
hell.
Like wait for it to comes on Netflix at least. But like, you know, things are cut in such a way where they're quick cuts and there's quick action that's happening where it tries to mask a lot of what's going on. And that even though it looks good on film in some regard to some extent, maybe not the Resident Evil stuff, but like in other films and such, and you can even argue with movies like The Raid, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Iron Monkey, or any of these other movies that are out that have come now out more in the modern day. Their problem is that it's not the actors that are really doing that action, even though they might do their own stunts, even though they might do something in real time right then and there. It's not the same as seeing Bruce Lee actually like kick a dude in real time for like a minute or so and the guy goes flying, or like he's actually jumping, or he's using those nunchucks for that however much time there in real fashion because he actually did that in real time. There was hardly any cuts like that, you know. He was more of a motion type of like visual artist and what he did. He wanted you to see what he was doing, to express himself with his body and his motion like that. He talks about this extensively in a lot of his books and a lot of his interviews. Whenever you watch one of them in English, it was really like what he really gets caught up on. But as opposed to now, more this day and age, where people that are inspired by him, that take example from him and stuff, really haven't caught on to that. Like if you go back now and you watch like a movie, let's say, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, like randomly. I'm trying to think of like what was the most recent action movie that came out that had fighting besides Resident Evil and such. That like really had like a lot of action scenes or fighting scenes and stuff, but really again had a lot of cuts, had a lot of was it stuff where you're using stunt doubles and stuff like that. It doesn't have that same emotion, doesn't have that same feeling that you would get when watching one of those films back in the day.
Yeah, so an example I'm just thinking of as we talk about it is where I would say I think there is an audience for it potentially in some form or other is like the Daredevil Netflix show. Like every season so far in the 2 seasons they've had, one of the most talked about sequences tends to be that like one long fight scene cut. So in the first season it's that long fight in the hall, the uncut fight scene in the hall. The second season it's the one kind of down the stairwell where yeah, there's probably a little bit of masking cuts in there, but it's put out there as like one extended scene, and kind of I think gets universally praised for like for the physicality and the brutality of the character in those moments, and just the choreography of the entire sequence that isn't being cut to death. So I like that's something that says to me at least that there's hope for that kind of choreography and fight work in a modern setting.
Exactly. Like again, and the reason why that a lot of people praise is because you could see all that. You could see all of that naturally and flow smoothly like that. That's what makes that Daredevil series so much fun, because like a lot of the action, even though again there's a lot of narrative building, a lot of world building related to the MCU and stuff, it's moments like that that make it so worth it to go through everything else, and it's so much fun to see that. And they've done it twice now, and I'm pretty sure they're going to do it in the 3rd season, which is going to be awesome when we finally watch it. I mean, I would like to see that kind of transfer over to some of the other series. Like I don't think you get it as much in Jessica Jones or Luke Cage, and eventually at some point I'll be able to talk about other series as well. But like, you know, I don't see that in a lot of other mediums or a lot of other like superhero shows or a lot of other action shows that pride themselves on either action or fighting and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're like alluding to Iron Fist or anything, if you're under embargo and have seen it or anything, but that's another, like that's the most direct.
That's the closest
like,
you'll probably get to it. Yeah,
that's
like Iron Fist.
I'm curious to see if we'll see something like that in Iron Fist, and or we'll see that kind of spirit, because like from the snippets I've seen of Iron Fist trailers and stuff, I look at that and I'm like, oh, like I see him with his power punch or whatever, and I immediately think of Bruce Lee doing like the one finger punch or whatever, and knocking somebody out. So yeah, that's I will be curious to see if we get kind of more of that, and I think the MCU movies in particular, especially like with something most recently like with Doctor Strange, where we do see a little bit more of that Eastern kind of combat style in there, while still, yes, cut to hell, I think still has is like, I as a theater person, as somebody who like took stage combat classes and has choreographed fights and stuff on stage, I love the choreography, even if it is cut to hell, because I know that it's mostly cut to hell just so they could get like the best angle, but a lot of time it is like they probably did the like an extended sequence all in one cut or all in one take, or had to get it to that point a lot of the time, just so that they have the options to cut from. So I'm always a fan of seeing that kind of stuff, even if it is like torn to shreds. But
You-
I think
you know something?
like. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought of something because the Batman movies more recently are good examples of this. Not the first Batman Begins, because Batman Begins I feel like has suffered from that problem big time. And like they did that I feel like purposely, because Batman he's supposed to be so quick you can't see him coming around and stuff. But the second Batman movie, The Dark Knight, did that very well. Like a lot of sequences like that are pretty damn handled awesomely. And the same thing also with The Dark Knight Rises to an extent, not as good as the second one. But like you'll have instances like that make it work, because again you could see it and stuff. Another good example going back to the MCU, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and that's an example of a movie. Again, I saw like 5 times or 6 times in theaters, and because it was so good. Where like there's cuts in the fight sequences, but there's those extended periods during those same like crazy fight sequences where you could see stuff going on. Where like when Captain America throws his shield and it bounces off a couple things, hits a few dudes, and it comes back to him, and then it cuts like right before it comes back to him. But you see that shield going around and smacking people in the face, or him doing some crazy flip and stuff. So there's a line I feel like where you could still use cuts in your sequences and your action and your fights and stuff. But like when it becomes overbearing, when it becomes overused, that's the fine line that people walk through. Like Daredevil got it right, Captain America: Winter Soldier got it right, Dark Knight got it right. Resident Evil got it clearly wrong, because there's a cut between like the same action from like a second of time that passes in the narrative. There's like 5 or 6 different cuts from like the same thing, or it gets repeated and stuff. It's like, okay, you have to show people what's happening. Like you could show it even for a brief second, but that still needs to be something where it could process to them when they're watching a movie.
Yeah. Excellent. So what would you look for in if there were to be like a modern day resurgence of kung fu? What would you look for in that?
Good story. I think that comes with the basis of every movie, hands down. It doesn't matter what genre. Good action, as far as like what's going down, like who's fighting who or why they're fighting. Which again, another characteristic from Bruce Lee movies that people don't give credit for, that he talks about in some documentaries. Why the people are fighting. He makes it a point to make it the audience knows, listen, this is why this person's fighting. This is why this person's like, going after such and such. It's not useless violence. That's a big problem now with modern day cinema and modern day action movies. The violence is mindless. There's no real reason to get behind it.
Yeah, and one of the things that gets me, and like it's something I've like it's a different kind of take on it, but like growing up I loved like the lightsaber duel from Phantom Menace at the end, and its choreography. And then as I started taking like choreography and like choreographing my own stage fights and stuff, I was like, okay, they are just dancing to dance in a lot of that sequence. And so one of the things I was always hyper aware of is like every moment in the fight, like one of the characters is basically going for a death blow. If I'm choreographing a fight between Romeo and Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, like they're fighting to the death. So every move that they have is like one of them is trying to kill the other one, and if they are lucky, they're defending it. So I was always hyper aware of, okay, like if I'm making this move, it's not just so that another sword can come up here. It's because I want to cut this person's head off. And it was trying to kind of enforce that in the actors, which I think does get lost a lot in kind of modern fight choreography. Is they create something that makes like for an interesting picture, but if you think about it, it's like why were you trying to attack that wouldn't have helped you at all if you were trying to go for their like leg in this moment or something when they clearly had the upper hand, and so like that will get me at times where but I think like the cuts and the overcutting kind of masks that, and you like it happens so quickly that you don't think about it, and they trick audiences into realizing that. So, but yeah, that's something that I've thought about kind of more over the years is making the fights matter. So not only this is why why these two people are fighting, but this is why they're fighting this way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other last things you'd want to see in a modern day kung fu?
In a modern day kung fu movie, just fun nods, like, fun little fan service, I think is always cool, because again, you get a lot of that in a lot of the superhero movies now these days. I think it'd be interesting to do that for a genre of movie, and it doesn't necessarily have to be kung fu movies. It could be in any other style of movie and stuff. And I think comedy is usually the one that gets that right sometimes, not just on the commentary for like what's going on at the time, but also for even its own genre. Like, perfect example, Shaun of the Dead is like that. What is it? That's all part of that same trilogy of movies. Like, which one's talking about.
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and exactly. World's End.
And World's End, yeah, those movies get it, and they do little stuff like that. Exactly what I'm talking about. But it would be interesting to see not so much a comedy take, but also a more nuanced, like serious take of the genre that gives friendly nods like that. And I don't mean just nods to Bruce Lee and stuff. I mean nods to other things.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, let's go ahead. Thank you for again. There's been a big old fighting podcast this time around.
We're fighting too much.
Yeah. But no, like I have a newfound appreciation of kung fu and kung fu that I didn't think was kung fu. That I can kind of go back and again, like even through the conversation, thinking about Daredevil through that lens or something like that.
Here's a cool thing.
Puts it in a new light. Yeah. Here's
a cool thing. Do you want a couple good recommendations of movies you should check out? Okay,
yeah.
I'll give like 5 recommendations for like anybody that wants to get into the genre. You can watch them through any lens. You don't need predetermined stuff with it. 5 Deadly Venoms. That's one.
Got that one.
Okay. 36 Chambers of Shaolin. Okay. What is it? Wheels on Meals. Okay, Jackie Chan for you. Or Meals on Wheels, like that. What is it? Drunken Fist or Drunken Master? Sorry.
You're Drunken Master, yeah.
Drunken Master.
I've seen Drunken Master.
It's a fun one. Not the more modern one, but the older one with the older dude, like that. Because there's 2 Drunken Master movies, believe it or not, that are kind of like the same style. I think there's Drunken Fist or Drunken Master, like that, and then the other one's kind of like the inverse of it. And then finally, Bruce Lee film, Way of the Dragon. Way of the Dragon perfectly encompasses like what exactly why Bruce Lee was so good. Besides Enter the Dragon itself, that's the one where he fights Chuck Norris in the Koalition. So that's a kung fu classic amongst people. But those are 5 movies that are more classic films that you guys could get a real kick out of.
Excellent. Thank you for all of that.